Japan, a country I've always felt a very, very profound, deep, strong affinity with, almost as much as I do with France. You know, France and Japan are two countries I've always felt a very deep connection with, on opposite sides of the world, very different, but always had a very strong connection. So, with those two countries, so it's strange that I haven't mentioned Japan for um, a while or done a video about it. And before I start, incidentally, the name Japan is not a Japanese name. The Japanese don't say Japan; they say Nihon, which looks like Nippon. I suppose if you're European, it looks like Nippon, Nihon, and the Japanese language is Nihongo. So yeah, the name Japan is not a Japanese name at all. I mean, most Japanese people recognize the name Japan. They know the word, they know the name, but it's not their name or their word. So what am I going to tackle in terms of Japan and Japanese things in this video? I'm going to try and make it a 10-minute video, but it's essentially what I want to talk about is how Japan is portrayed as the squeaky clean country, isn't it? You know, they can do no wrong. You know, superhuman, perfect people. Everything's clean and perfect and wonderful and efficient, and it's a beautiful culture, beautiful country, polite, ultra polite people, respectful. Uh, you know, all nearly all good. There's very, very little negative, if any, that the international community seem to say about Japan or seem to see in Japan. They have a squeaky clean image, apart from obviously the Second World War. Very, very dark stuff there in the Second World War, which people, yeah, especially the older generation, talk about that. But generally speaking, everyone thinks all good and all positive about Japan. It has this squeaky clean image, doesn't it? A bit like Canada and Switzerland. They have this sort of squeaky clean paradise sort of idyllic image, don't they, to the eyes of the world, the international community. But what about the reality, though? You know, doesn't every country have negatives, some more than others? You know, aren't people just people? Human societies are just human societies, and many issues are similar, surely, in every country, you know, obviously with differences and variations, and, you know, different countries have different strengths and different weaknesses to varying extents. But, you know, what is the reality about Japan? You know, what are the Japanese really like? And, you know, what issues and problems are there in Japan? Because they have this perfect, squeaky clean image, don't they? And I always questioned this since I first started talking to my uncle when I was about 15 in London, who was married to a Japanese lady for decades. And I used to sort of ask him a lot of questions about Japan. And I used to think, well, you know, what about the imperfections? What about the difficulties? You know, not that we don't want a country to be wonderful, not that we're looking for negatives or to be pessimistic, but what about the negatives? What about the negative realities of that country? And I used to question him, and he really couldn't see it. You know, he would always say very positive and very edifying things about Japan, and almost not be aware of or ignore any possible negatives. As I said, Canada and Switzerland also have that squeaky clean image, don't they, as well? Not so much now, maybe. Obviously, the political situation in Canada is diabolical at the moment. And not to the extent that Japan has, but Canada and Switzerland definitely do have this idyllic, sort of perfect, squeaky clean image as well. A lot of that will be to do with their scenery, of course. But, you know, yes, Japan does have some big strengths that other countries don't have. Yes, there are things they're really good at. Yes, they are exceptional and unique in some ways. But obviously, that's, you know, as when you're a tourist and you see things in public, you see the public face of people, and you see how safe it is and how polite it is generally in public. I mean, the Japanese are very good at holding it together in public. It's true. So often you won't really see, if they've got a chip on their shoulder, you won't know about it. You won't see what they're really thinking or feeling because they're painfully polite. So that's a strength and a weakness, I suppose. And but obviously behind closed doors, they're people just like people here. And um, yes, there is crime in Japan. People talk about how safe it is in public, and yes, even at night, even in a rough area. I mean, a Japanese rough area is nothing, is nothing compared with a rough area in the UK. But there are some dodgy or rundown areas in Japan, and yes, even those areas are relatively safe by international standards, and people generally won't harass you. And street crime is very, very low, and you are very, very safe in public, even at night, with the odd exception, of course. But things do still go on. Terrible, bad things obviously still go on. People have their problems, but it's behind closed doors, and you have to sort of get to know people, get involved with people, or work there, or have relationships with people there to see the human side, to see the negatives, to see the issues and what really goes on behind closed doors. Because so much of life in Japan, real life, or should we say, the negatives, which maybe the international community just don't see. So many of these things happen behind closed doors. There is corruption. There is violent crime. But generally in public, they manage to hold it together. Generally in public, they're painfully polite and they manage to behave themselves. And if they do need to express something negative or angry, they do it in a very controlled and polite way. So a bit like the British in a way, the Japanese, they keep a lot pent up and a lot bottled up. So they have a high rate of depression and suicide in Japan. So there's a negative because they keep things bottled up and pent up a lot. And then sometimes, they find it difficult to express emotions or how they really feel. And then crazy things happen. People end up exploding in the end or having breakdowns and all that sort of thing. So there is a parallel there with the English in a way, although not, we're nowhere near to the extent the Japanese have this sort of painfully polite and restraining of emotions tendency. But yeah, I mean, when I first went to Japan for 10 days was December 2004 on my birthday. And I arrived in Osaka on a sunny Sunday afternoon in December. So it was winter, but quite mild and blue skies every day, except for the last of the 10 days when I was there. So that was my first trip, and it was epic. It was a dream. I was there for 10 days, 3 days in Hiroshima, 3 days in Osaka, 3 or 4 days in Kyoto, which is the old capital where you see all the more quaint old streets and buildings and old school Japan more, whereas obviously somewhere like Tokyo, much more high tech and modern, and Osaka, very few old buildings in Osaka, because it was so heavily, and obviously Hiroshima as well, because it was so seriously destroyed and bombed in the Second World War. So most of the buildings are post-war. But getting back to the point, yes, Japan has this idyllic image. Yes, it is very clean and tidy in public. Even the rough areas, even the rundown areas are clean and tidy in public by international standards, and safe as well, as I said, even the rundown areas. But Osaka, the second largest city after Tokyo, is, should we say, a bit more rough, a bit more honest, speak as you speak, say what you mean what you say, because sort of like, I don't know, the East End of Japan. Osaka is a bit rougher and a bit more forthright, a bit more honest in the way they speak, but they're still essentially Japanese people. But should we say a little bit rough around, bit more rough around the edges than Tokyo, as I prefer to say, Tokyo. But yeah, so I arrived in Osaka on that Sunday afternoon, December 2004, and my first experience when I arrived, I was in a tube station crowded with people out on a Sunday afternoon, crowds of people, shoppers, in the underground station, trying to find my way to this traditional inn I was staying at. And the my first experience, the first thing I saw when I arrived in that country was a homeless guy, probably about 70, alcoholic, addict, down and out, whatever you want to, however you want to call it. He was about 70, I'd say, and clearly in a bad way. And he was standing in the underground. He was shouting something out in Japanese, possibly in the local Osaka dialect, calling out something to the crowd. And in many ways, much similar to what you'd see here, crowds of people just ignoring him and walking past him in the underground. And clearly he had issues. I don't know what his story was or how he is now, 20 years later. But that was my first experience, seeing this down and out guy or alcoholic in the underground calling out something. But he wasn't well, obviously. So yeah, real life, the darker side, the actual real Japan, you might say, just like you find in any country, problems, issues, um, people being people. It's not all squeaky clean. Yeah, I mean, okay, Japan is clean and tidy, and they are painfully polite most of the time in public. But it was so refreshing for me because I wanted to see the real. I wanted to be a real tourist and not a tourist, and actually see real life and the good and the bad, you know, the negatives and the positives. And that was my first experience when arriving. You know, most tourists, their first experience is everything that's lovely and beautiful for the tourists, and how friendly people are. Well, they'll certainly be polite, if not, even if not friendly as such, they'll be polite and often friendly as well. But yeah, that was my first experience, seeing this homeless guy in the underground in Japan, which has this squeaky clean image, you know, one of the richest countries in the world, very strong economy, though nowhere near as strong as it was. There is more poverty or hardship now than there was in Japan. And yeah, that's my first experience when I got there, seeing this homeless guy or alcoholic, you know, whatever he was or is. Um, so yeah, you know, not what a tourist expects to see, or not what a tourist will normally talk about when they arrive in a country. And there is hardship in Japan. Um, People do have problems. People do fall out. People do have arguments. People do get upset. As I said, quite a high rate of depression and suicide by international standards, although they have tried to do something about that. Um, so, yeah, when you delve into the Japanese news and you hear Japanese people talking about real life and being real, opinions on various things, and you hear, um, I mean, yeah, they do have some big strengths as a nation, um, but and they have achieved a lot, and they're very adaptable, and partly maybe because it's an earthquake country with with a lot of earthquakes, maybe because of their very dark past and the destruction and darkness of their Second World War experience, which they've really moved on from now. Nowadays, the Japanese, they tend to keep right away from war and stay out of it and just get on with their own thing. They don't want anything to do with war unless it's absolutely necessary. They're more pacifist now and just sort of get on with things quietly on their own there. Um, but yeah, they also, the media, the mainstream media, they always show you um, the center of Tokyo, with all the neon lights and very high tech and crowds of people all going across that crossing. I forget that road crossing. I forget what it's called now in the center of Tokyo. And the media always show that the neon lights and the technology and hardworking people and people rushing around and all this. But actually, the real Japan, okay, there's a bit of that. Of course, there is that. But once you get out of Tokyo, you go to small towns, villages. There's loads and loads of fantastic countryside, coastline, volcanoes, mountains, beaches. And when you get out of Tokyo and you actually experience the small towns and villages, and you see that some very humble places. Not everywhere's really, really immaculately smart and tidy. Some places are a bit more rugged, and yeah, just down to earth. Lots of down to earth places, slightly more run down places. It's not all perfect and high tech and immaculate like they often show you in the mainstream media and on tourist programs. It annoys me in a way. They keep showing Tokyo, the center of Tokyo, and all those coloured lights and skyscrapers and all that, and the bullet train and all that. Those things are there, of course, but they very rarely show you the other side of Japan, the more down to earth side. Small towns, villages, countryside, um, and issues, problems like every country has, every society has, which, as I said, mainly are behind closed doors. You don't see much of the imperfections and the reality in public because they have this squeaky clean image. But yeah, there are rundown areas, and I'm repeating myself. And a lot of tourists, they don't see this. They see Japan, don't they, as squeaky clean. And yeah, I've delved a lot into Japanese news and current affairs and seen the reality. Now, I know I've waffled quite a bit now. We're up to, getting on to 17 minutes. So, but yeah, essentially that's what I wanted to say today. Yes, Japan does have some strengths and some great things about it, and some things they're really good at and things they excel at, but the international image they have of perfection, squeaky clean, is very deceiving. It's not the reality. It's only part of the reality, and not everywhere is lovely in Japan. Not everywhere is smart, and you know there's good and bad, nicer places, not so nice places. I mean, it is a very modern, westernized country, a bit like France or Germany. They're very European in many ways. They have a welfare state, you know, infrastructure, welfare state, all those sort of things. A bit like a European country, France or Germany or Britain. So they're very European in that way. It's very modern. Everyone's looked after, well, in theory anyway, within reason. Obviously, as we know, there are always people who slip through the net, so to speak, and certainly that's what's happening now in Britain, isn't it? Somebody's doing some hammering downstairs, knocking a nail into a wall, I think. I don't know if you could hear that. But yeah, Japan's not squeaky clean, and if you do go there, you'll see that it's an imperfect human society like anywhere else, and try and look beyond Tokyo. There's a whole world beyond Tokyo, and as I said, my first experience of arriving in Japan was seeing a homeless person, a homeless guy, alcoholic, whatever, in a bad way, and crowds of people just walking past him in the underground in Osaka. I'm sure there's loads more to say on this subject, but yeah, I mean, people forget as well, there are working class Japanese people, rougher Japanese people, for want of a better word. I was brought up in a working class background, so when I say working class, there's nothing, negative about that. It's just a neutral description. But yeah, Japan has its rougher people, working class people, its issues. But the media here, they just tend to show you the poshest, the best, the sophisticated, the perfect aspects of Japanese society. And I think this is so misleading. Japan's not this squeaky clean, perfect country. And the reality behind closed doors is something quite different. So yeah, I'm sure we'll talk about Japan again, but I'll leave it there. Double the time I said I would be on for. Exactly 20 minutes now. Thank you for listening, and all comments, reactions welcome as always, positive, negative, or anything in between.